The scale of the result is surprising. I think most people expected that he would get a majority in order to be able to govern on his own, that the NPP-JVP would not have to go into alliances to form a majority in parliament. So having taken that as read, one didn't expect the scale of the victory. The two-thirds majority that he's got is somewhat surprising. And I suspect, too, that the JVP-NPP government itself did not expect the scale of this majority and perhaps are a bit concerned. This is the first time since the PR system was introduced into our politics that a single party has won a two-thirds majority. I would think that Anura Kumara Dissanayake, despite what his past has been, is an absolute pragmatist. He is going to do, within that framework of a left-of-center position, he is going to do whatever he can to ensure that he remains in power and that the NPP-JVP promise to the electorate is in no way discarded. But he is, in my opinion, very much of a pragmatist.
With this enormous mandate and his own personal popularity, is he perhaps the most powerful president Sri Lanka's had?
Well, at one level, yes, in terms of the popularity. Certainly, he is one of the most popular presidents of the country as we speak today.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Just how extraordinary is the parliamentary mandate President Anura Kumara Dissanayake has won in Sri Lanka? What does it tell us about the sort of country Sri Lanka has become? And how is the president likely to use his sweeping political powers? Those are the key questions I shall put today to the Executive Director of the Centre for Policy Alternatives, Paikiasothy Saravanamuttu. Dr. Saravanamuttu, President Anura Kumara Disanayake's National People's Party coalition has won 159 seats in Parliament, which is more than two-thirds, with nearly 62% of the vote. On election day, the president had said he hoped for strong representation. He's ended up with something that is far, far better. So how much of a surprise is the result?
Well, I think the scale of the result is surprising. I think most people expected that he would get a majority in order to be able to govern on his own, that the NPP-JVP would not have to go into alliances to form a majority in parliament. So having taken that as read, one didn't expect the scale of the victory. The two-thirds majority that he's got is somewhat surprising. And I suspect, too, that the JVP-NPP government itself did not expect the scale of this majority and perhaps are a bit concerned how to manage it into the future.
In other words, they're almost shaken themselves and shocked.
I think there's a certain element of shock in terms of the absolute scale of the victory. And it's a victory that, after all, happened in the north and east of the country, in the southwest, all over the country.
Absolutely. Let's focus first on the mandate the Sri Lankan people have given President Dissanayake. A two-thirds majority when you have proportional representation is not just extremely rare, but am I right in saying it's never happened before in Sri Lanka?
Absolutely correct. This is the first time since the PR system was introduced into our politics that a single party has won a two-thirds majority. The very first time.
I think it is particularly surprising because PR makes such large majorities very, very difficult to obtain.
Indeed. Of course, though, there are coalitions that have managed to come close to it. But here, it is the first time that a single party, and the JVP-NPP has always maintained that they will not be forming alliances with any other party. So it's a major victory in that respect.
Now, secondly, the NPP, whose largest component is the JVP, a Sinhala majority party, has won the majority of votes in the north, which is Tamil dominated, in the east, where there's a large Muslim population, and in the hill country, where there are also a large number of Tamils. In fact, in Jaffna, I believe it's won 3 out of 6 seats, beating all the Tamil parties. Isn't that a significant transformation of the way the JVP is perceived? In the 80s, it was seen as anti-Tamil and Sinhala racist. Now Tamils and Muslims are voting for it in preference to their own regional parties.
Yes, it is a significant change in how the JVP is perceived, but it's also a significant change in terms of how the electorate wants government and governance to improve in Sri Lanka. If you take the voting Jaffna, etc., I mean, I think the opposition to the JVP NPP were so divided. You know, in the past, you had the Tamil National Alliance, which managed to bring them all together, but this was not necessarily the case as far as this election is concerned. Secondly, the young people who are very strongly about governance, about anti-corruption, all of that, I think voted in large numbers for the JVP and PP. They are totally committed to this notion that they have to have a better economic life for themselves, and that corruption is absolutely toxic. So I think the anti-corruption platform of the JVP did appeal to the relatively young voters in the north and east. And in addition to that, of course, their political parties who they've hitherto been voting for in the past were focusing on questions like constitutional reform and things that didn't affect immediately, directly, the day-to-day lives of people, or at least that's how I think it was perceived.
So, are you saying that the JVP's anti corruption platform appealed so strongly to young people in the north, but also young Muslims in the east as well as in the hill country, that it overcame whatever hesitation and traditional reservation Tamils and Muslims had for the JVP, particularly in the 80s and 90s?
Anti-corruption, as well as the promise of economic reforms. The traditional parties really don't have an economic policy and never did. They were packed with lawyers who talked about constitutional reform and fundamental rights. So the JVP instead, I mean, and I think this is one of the great successes of the JVP. The JVP tapped in to the Aragalaya in terms of what that was all about and recognized that anti-corruption and providing people with the means to have 3 square meals a day and to have access their medical services and all of that, those were the real issues that gripped the population.
So, in other words, this is a vote for better governance.
Absolutely.
Now, the other significant outcome of this result is that Sri Lanka's traditional parties have been effectively decimated. The Rajapaksa's SLPP has been reduced to just 3 seats, and former President Vikramasinghe's UNP, I believe, has been left with just 1 seat. And whilst Premadasa's SJP may have won 40 seats, that's only just about 1/4 of what the NPP has managed. So would you agree that the large traditional parties that have dominated Sri Lankan politics for decades are now in dire straits?
Yes, I mean, the SJB has 40 seats in parliament, and the United National Party, under the banner of the Democratic United Front, I think it is, they have 5 seats, 40 and 5. Anyway, no, the way that these two parties fared are a clear demonstration that the electorate was sick and fed up of those people who had power in the past. They were seen as a discredited old elite. It was a vote against the status quo. It was a vote for change. It was a vote against what they saw as the corrupt and corrupting old elites of politics.
So it's a vote for good governance, anti-corruption, but also a vote against traditional elites of the past. All 3 factors are very important.
And the elites of the past are seen as the embodiments of that corrupt status quo.
Now, the other thing I notice is that in September at the presidential elections, President Dissanayake got 42% of the vote. This time in the parliamentary polls, the NPP JVP has got nearly 62%. How much of that huge increase reflects the president's own personal popularity and the enormous faith and trust the Sri Lankans have shown in him?
Absolutely. I mean, the increase in the vote is somewhat contributed to by the popularity of Anura Kumara Dissanayake. In the presidential election, perhaps people did have reservations, and therefore we had a low turnout in terms of he was declared a minority president because he didn't get the 50% of the vote. But I think subsequent to his election, the various things that he's been doing, and of course he's been doing things that do not require legislative approval, but nevertheless the tone, the temper, the sort of notion that we are going to have a new political culture, encourage people to come out and give him the necessary parliamentary support. But that they did so in such large numbers is also, I think, because the opposition parties clearly did not define what their program was. They kept talking about the fact that the JVP cannot govern. If it is a government, it's going to only last for 3 months or 6 months or 1 year, and we'll be back after that. I think the population voted against that sort of cynical interpretation of the political trends in the country. So yes, they voted because of Anura Kumara's popularity. They voted because of what they saw as happening since he was elected. And they voted because they believe his intentions are pure, as it were, and that, yes, he will change not just the political culture, but he will also reform government and governance.
So with this enormous mandate and his own personal popularity, is he perhaps the most powerful president Sri Lanka's had?
Well, at one level, yes, in terms of the popularity. But remember, President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga won the presidency by 62% or something like that in 1994. So in terms of the popular vote registered, perhaps that's not quite clear. But certainly he is one of the most popular presidents of the country as we speak today.
One last question about the mandate before I move to how the president is likely to use the power he's got. Has the NPP been accepted as a truly national formation by all of Sri Lanka's communities? And is therefore Sri Lanka now a more politically united country than it's been for a long while?
On the basis of the election results, the answer would have to be yes, because the NPP won votes right throughout the country, and no one can challenge that. So yes, as we stand today, we are a united country in terms of our expectations of what this government will do into the future.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Let's then come at this point, Dr. Saravanamuttu, to what this mandate will enable President Dissanayake to do. First, with a two-thirds majority, he can easily fulfill his commitment to abolish the executive presidency. But the question is, will he? You've had presidents in the past, like President Sirisena, who were committed to abolishing the executive presidency and didn't do so. Might that happen again?
Well, with regard to President Anura Kumara and the new NPP-JVP government, they don't have any obstacles in their way to abolish the executive presidency and bring a new constitution. They have the two-thirds majority, and I'm sure they will win a referendum. So what they have promised is that before the end of their first term, a new constitution will be brought in. As to whether that would definitely have included in it abolition of the executive presidency, waits to be seen. But in the past, they have talked about the abolition of the executive presidency and a new electoral system. They've also said that they will fully implement the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which has been hanging fire, as it were, since 1988. And that is with regard to police and land powers to the provinces. Everything else in the amendment has been delivered, as it were, by other governments. But these are the two outstanding issues. And that, again, will go somewhere in reinforcing their support as far as the North and East in particular is concerned.
Let me take up the 2 points you made one by one. First of all, he's committed to abolishing the executive presidency before the end of his first term. That means he's got 5 years to do it. It's not necessarily an immediate task that he'll do in the next few months or year or the next year.
Well, he could do it. He could do it if he wanted to. But the outer limit, as it were, is the first term of his presidency, 5 years.
And the second thing is he's committed himself to handing over police powers and land rights to the different states of the country. That, I presume, is going to improve his relationship with India quite enormously, because it's a demand the Indian government has been making for a decade.
Absolutely. India has been seen as a sort of godfather, if you like, of the 13th Amendment and devolution as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. And yes, India has always maintained that the 13th Amendment must be fulfilled.
And was this another reason why Tamils voted in such large numbers for him, because of this commitment?
Well, he was not the only person, or the NPP, JVP were not the only party who said that they would fully implement the 13th Amendment. But I think they obviously had greater trust and confidence as far as the JVP and NPP were concerned than with the others.
Now, secondly, President Dissanayake is also committed to renegotiating the IMF agreement, although he's also indicated that he will not seek to abrogate it and not endanger it. With this huge mandate behind him, will it convince the IMF that they need to take steps to help him, that the IMF needs to be cooperative rather than resistant?
Well, he has said that he will not break the bounds, as it were, of the IMF framework. But within that, he's looking for wiggle room, if you like, to provide more subsidies, to reduce taxes, to raise salaries, and sort of a whole raft of welfare measures to relieve the burden that has been put on the least able to adjust to the new circumstances. Now, I don't know the extent to which he can actually do that, but I think if he is restricted somewhat, and the IMF is in town at the present moment, it's a question of convincing his parliamentary majority to go along with him. Because the NPP-JVP parliamentary majority is made up largely of JVPers, and the hardcore cadre might insist on more subsidies and more welfare measures and all of that. So how he manages and negotiates that is going to be the first marker of his ability to politically manage a large majority and to get the governance reforms through.
But you're also suggesting that he could face a certain amount of pressure. I won't say opposition and resistance, but pressure from his own people when it comes to his economic policies.
Yes, he could, in terms of not the nature of it, but the degree of it, in terms of how much he can do with regard to reducing taxes, increasing the salaries of public servants, managing the state-owned enterprises without outright privatizing them, cutting down on the public service, 1.4 million public service, which badly needs reduction.
What do you believe are his own instincts when it comes to handling the economy? The international press has taken to describing him as leftist or Marxist. Does that still apply to the way he thinks today, or are those misplaced, outdated appellations?
I would think that Kumara Dissanayake, despite what his past has been, is an absolute pragmatist. He is going to do, within that framework of a left-of-center position, he is going to do whatever he can to ensure that he remains in power and that the NPP-JVP promise to the electorate is in no way discarded. But he is, in my opinion, very much of a pragmatist.
So pragmatism more than ideological commitment will be his hallmark.
That's what I think, yes.
Now, third, I read from the press that the president is committed to returning military occupied lands to Tamils in the north. Is that another way of implementing the 13th Amendment, or is it something further?
Well, it is a way of implementing the 13th Amendment in terms of it goes with the spirit of devolution. But in general, it is something that needs to be done because reconciliation in the country demands it, and people voted also for the NPP JVP probably because of this. And in addition to that, it's costly. We have not demobilized since that army won the war against the Tamil Tigers. And so we need something maybe like a GI Bill or whatever it is, where people are trained and then let into the economy in general, because at the present moment, particularly in the north, where about two-thirds of the army is based, they are buying and selling vegetables, running golf courses, hotels. They are involved in all sorts of activity. And that must be stopped because they're taking jobs away from civilians.
So, this is a very important, necessary step.
Absolutely.
Now, beyond specifics, the scale of mandate does permit the president to be not just reformist in a big way, but radical and far reaching. Do you think he's likely to be that? Or when you say he's a pragmatist, he'll avoid these extremes?
Well, I think the pragmatism is based on the relationship with the IMF with getting us out of the economic crisis. But in terms of radical, I think the change in the political culture in the country, a change perhaps with regard to the education system in the country, which badly needs reform, those are the areas where the sort of radical dimension of the JVP NPP can be demonstrated.
And do you think it's likely to be?
I hope so. I think so.
Now, the one, I suppose, negative point is that the NPP has no real experience of governance. The president, other than the 2 years he spent, I believe, as a minister in, I think it was Mrs. Kumara Tunga's cabinet, has no real experience of governance himself. Is inexperience going to be a problem, both for the president and the government he appoints?
Well, that's left to be seen. This is what everyone says, that they have no clue about how it is to govern, and that governing is very different from actually running a political campaign. Well, I always think that there has to be a first time for everyone, and there are a fair number of university academics, teachers, doctors who are part of the 159. So it remains to be seen how well they are going to cope with the exigencies of government. So I'm not 100% lacking in confidence in terms of their capacity to govern. But as I say, it's still very early days.
Now, as we speak, literally as we record this interview, the president is in the process of appointing and announcing his first cabinet. How much of a test of his skill of governance and of his judgment will that be?
Well, I think people will be looking to discern as to how many of the new cabinet, and he says it's going to be 25 or below, are actual hardcore JVPers, and how many of them are the more supposedly technocratic NPPers. Then we'll get a sense of what the balance within the JVP NPP is, the balance of power within it. Yeah.
I take it what you're also saying, without saying it so specifically, is the larger the number of technocrats, the greater the confidence in the government amongst the people as a whole.
Perhaps, yes.
And do you expect the prime minister he appointed in September to continue as prime minister?
Well, at that point, if I remember correctly, they said that the person who gets the largest number of preference votes in the general election will be made prime minister. Harini has got the second largest number of preference votes. The other minister in the cabinet before the general election, Vijita Herat, has got some 700,000 odd preference votes. So I don't know whether that would change.
Finally, they say absolute power corrupts absolutely. Is there a danger of the president becoming authoritarian or misusing the huge majority or misusing his popularity?
Well, there's always a danger of that. Look, I mean, in the first 6 months to a year, I think this government has to do something on corruption. And as I said before, it can't just go for the small fry. It has to go for the big fish. Now, Anura Kumara Dissanayake at various times has appeared in public with a number of files. The question is, do those files contain sufficient evidence to convict someone in a court of law? Now, if those 6 months comes by or 1 year comes by and nothing really has happened with regard to corruption, there might be pressure on him, therefore, to go for an extrajudicial mechanism, go outside of the normal process, the due process of the law, and create a mechanism to deal with corruption. Now, I think that would be very dangerous because that could set the precedent for people going after political opponents and also then victimizing or allowing those people who are convicted to present themselves as victims. So it remains to be seen as to how he is going to manage this, because expectations are really high. And that is something that can collapse, not in a very pleasant way at times.
You're suggesting that popular public opinion is waiting, perhaps impatiently, for what you call the big fish to be caught, tried, and brought to justice. And how he does it will determine whether he does it legitimately or whether he's forced to create extra constitutional mechanisms for doing so.
Exactly.
Any sense of who the big fish could be, might be? Are we talking
well,
of
I mean, the popular opinion in the country is the Rajapaksas and the entire lot of people that they brought into government and positions of authority in government. So it is those
in danger?
He could be. Yes, there are various allegations against him as well.
So really, the traditional elite would be virtually decapitated if he were to arrest all these big fish you've named.
Well, if he were to do that, yes. But the question is as to whether he can do it with sufficient evidence and do it through the due process of law.
How long is it before the Sri Lankan people become impatient? And therefore, how quickly does he need to act?
Well, I mean, I would say, yeah, but I'm told by some people that no, 6 months is the period.
So this is a very interesting and also exciting time.
Yeah, I mean, that I think is where the sense of urgency appears. And that is an issue on which he won his presidential election, an issue which brought him this huge, unprecedented majority in parliament and all of that. And therefore, he has to deliver on that.
Dr. Saravanamuttu, thank you very much for opening the eyes of the Indian audience, both to the nature of the phenomenal mandate that President Dissanayake has won, but also to the sort of steps and measures we can now expect him to take with these sweeping powers behind him. Thank you very much indeed. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.